If you're passionate at all about storytelling, go make it. Just go do it. Write it and do it and shoot it and get over it. And once you've done that, a door will open. It may not be the door that you wanted or expected, but a door will open. I guarantee you. In your head, for another idea or another avenue, or with somebody wanting to work with you, or somebody that thought you were creative and wanted you to try something. But just really move forward because the opportunity is there in your pocket.
That was Fred Toye, television and film director, storytelling hero, and all-round nice guy. In this episode of Make Moves, Fred explains what directors do, how he worked his way up from the bottom to the top of his industry, why having fun and being passionate about film is the key to success in the industry, and he also gives some advice for the people who are just coming up in the TV and film world. Oh, and he also definitively answers the question whether his short movie Lost was the inspiration for the blockbuster TV series. All that and more in this episode 6. Keep on listening. 2, 3, Hey there, podcast people. John here. You're listening to episode 6 of Make Moves. So glad you could join us. Today we feature a great interview with Fred Toye. He was such a hoot to talk to. What a fun guy. I met Fred at a pizza place in town by my house, and he was so understated. We were chit-chatting a little bit, kind of leaked out that he did some work in television and film. I got excited, asked him if he would come on the show, and he said yes. He was so excited about it. I got home that night and I looked him up. I had no idea that I had just met the man. Fred's worked on shows including Person of Interest, The Good Wife, 11/22/63, CSI Cyber, CSI New York, Vegas, Hawaii Five-0, Melrose Place, Miami Medical, Ghost Whisperer, Brothers and Sisters, Lost, Alias, and he's got something out soon called Westworld. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Really an accomplished guy and so humble and lovely to talk to. I'm not going to yap too much here because I think you can learn a whole lot more by listening to Fred than by listening to me, but I will check in with you at about the halfway point and play a little bit of music. Until then, I'm going to turn off the mic, you turn on your ears, and enjoy yourself. It's a great interview. Fred, welcome to Make Moves.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So glad you're taking some time. If you hear, audience members, if you hear beeping in the background, we picked a day to do an interview where there's construction in the background, so... There you go. There's your fair warning. So I was jumping in trying to prepare for this interview. I wanted to make sure that I roughly knew what you did as a human being. I'm not in the industry that you're in, so I looked on Wikipedia, the great equalizer of the internet, and this is what they said a director does. Primarily, the director is responsible for calling the broadcast, supervising the placement of professional video cameras, lighting equipment, microphones, props, graphics, blah, 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 blah. In a dramatic arts production, the television director's role can be similar to a film director's, giving cues to actors, directing the camera placement and movement. In television show composed of individual episodes, the television director role may differ from a director in that he or she will usually only work on some of the episodes instead of all of them, basically. Is that kind of accurate? Is there an insider version of that definition that has more sauciness attached to it, or is that pretty close?
I think that in film and television, the role of the director is more or less the same in the sense that the director is the primary storyteller to the audience of any given story that you've decided to tell. So there's a very elaborate process, as you know, for production of developing an idea, producing a script, getting changes and notes on that script, finally agreeing to go into production, casting it, going forward, and shooting, then editing. That's the pre-production, production, and post-production are the 3 phases of production. And the director's involved in all of them. The director's involved in the writing process, especially the director is involved in production and seeing it through, and then also in post-production. And effectively, the director and his point of view, or his or her point of view, is the primary directive during the process of making a movie or a television show. In the case of television, which I primarily do, a television series has either 13 or 22 episodes in a year, and no one director could complete all of those. As a matter of fact, it's been attempted a few times where directors have tried to do 13 straight episodes, and they either die or barely survive.
Yeah.
So
dying is a
right. So what happens is directors, that you have to hire a number of directors in order to execute, let's say, a 13 episode order of something. Usually there would be 7 directors or something like that in that case, or in the case of a 22 episode order, there's probably about 15 directors or something that are working on that. That's only because in the process of writing, shooting, and editing, it all has to overlap in order for you to have that to have 22 hours or 13 hours of television completed. So what the director does is comes on, and in the pre-production process, there's a script that's been produced and been vetted through the process. The writer and the director work together on modifying the script for whether it be story reasons or because of production issues or ideas that have come up, and we're going to shoot in Alaska instead of New Mexico and all of these things. And then you go into production. You have a certain number of days, and because it's very expensive to shoot with all the equipment and everything like that, you have a certain number of days and hours that you're going to be able to execute it, and it's part of the director's job in order to accomplish it in that amount of time. And then into the post-production process, the editor and the director work together to do a director's cut, and that cut is then turned over to producers, and the producers work on it, and then ultimately it's released. In the film business, it works primarily the same. The only difference in the film business is that the director is more directly involved from the very beginning all the way to the very end, whereas a television director often will only come in for a very short preparation period and a shooting period and a very short post-production period. But effectively the process is the same. And a director has a point of view, has a story they want to tell. They work with the actors on every day on the floor. They help them with their motivation and what they're doing. They work with prop people and set people. They work with a cameraman and a camera operator and a director of photography, and they work through the lighting and scheme and where the shots are going to be and how the story's going to be told, and they deal with the weather and everything in between. And then finally you get to the end of the production and you have a completed shot episode or movie, and you work with the editor. And that's effectively the job of a director.
Well, I feel like I roughly understand what you do now. So, and I take it you're used to big production, so this one microphone podcast studio is not intimidating you right now. Just a sort of a quick lead-off question. I noticed that you were born in L.A., and a lot of your credits have 2 middle initials, Frederick E.O. Toye. I go by John W. Hammond, not to be confused with John F. Hammond,
yes,
or the other famous John Hammonds. And I was wondering, was TV or film part of a family business? Is there another Fred Toye out there, or is this just sort of a...
There are other Fred Toyes there because I'm the fourth. Okay. I'm Fred the fourth, and my dad's name is Fred Toye. He goes by Bud, and my grandfather, who's no longer with us, was Fred Toye, and my great-grandfather was Fred Toye, who was a musician. He was the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. So I had some arts in my family. Mm-hmm. My grandmother, his wife, was an opera singer, and she had done original productions of Puccini operas in New York and Milan, and she was famous for doing that. But other than that, I don't have artists in my family, and I didn't have anybody in the film industry. But when I was a young person, I liked movies, and I especially liked television. I watched everything on television, and I was a huge fan of Twilight Zone and I Love Lucy and movies. I was obsessed with movies, and so I decided that I wanted to direct specifically. Didn't want to be a producer. I was also an actor in high school, which I loved, and I started acting with the idea that perhaps I could be an actor. But it came clear to me after high school that it was not a career that I could handle, in the sense that there's a lot of insecurity there, and I felt like I really needed to have a skill set, like a toolbox, which I don't have a toolbox, by the way, but I felt like I needed a toolbox in order to go to work and get paid to do it, right? Because I wanted to actually work, and I wanted to make money, and I wanted to be able to function. So I decided pretty early on that I wanted to be a director specifically. And so the goal for me was, how do I do that? And my approach, and everybody has a different approach. I mean, certainly I went to film school here at UC Santa Barbara, and a number of my colleagues went straight into being directors and are doing it now and have been successful or making documentary films or whatever. I didn't feel right about going right into it, because I didn't feel as though, one, I possessed the ability, the storytelling ability, to go straight into being a storyteller. I felt like I needed an education, a little bit more information about how to do it specifically, and from a technical aspect, really how do you use a camera, how do you edit, how do you light something, how do you work with an actor, all of these things I felt like I wasn't capable of doing at the time. So I looked at it, and because I didn't have anybody in the industry that was a relative or anything, I needed to start as a gopher. And so I was, I volunteered on my first project in 1986 as a production assistant. And my first job was doing cue cards for Ed Asner on a television series. And so I would write out the cue cards, I get the script, and they said, okay, Ed needs these scenes because we're about to do this scene. So I'd sit down with my cue cards and I'd write out the things or whatever. And it was my job to stand there for Ed and hold the cue card. I don't know how I got that job. It was great. And hold the cue cards for Ed as he did these long speeches because he was playing Socrates. And subsequently, I ended up working with Ed again as a director twice now, 2 times on 2 separate shows. Last time was about a year ago. And it was really a wonderful sort of come full circle kind of moment for me to be able to be sitting in the director's chair, working with Ed Asner, who I had worked with when I was a gopher. So I started working as a production assistant effectively, and you get hamburgers for people. I knew all the restaurants, in Los Angeles. I had a little MGB, and I'd drive around and I would get hamburgers for people and pass scripts around, and I have all kinds of funny stories about people's houses that I would have to go to, and I'd get yelled at, and all kinds of, giving scripts to people and stuff like that. And some people were really nice. I was invited into people's houses. I mean, like Liam Neeson. I remember delivering a script to Liam Neeson, and he was like, "Oh, come on, I'll talk to you." Sit down, and he sat down. We had a nice chat or whatever. I went to Warren Beatty's house, and when I went to Warren Beatty's house, they had an assistant standing outside in the driveway, this big gate on Mulholland Drive. I drive up, and I'm like, "I'm here for Warren." I was so excited because I was thinking, "Oh my God, I'm gonna meet Warren Beatty." Drive up the driveway, and there's a guy standing there with his hand up, stopping my car. Stop there. No, stop. No, now. Stop now. Do not get out of your car. Do not get out of your car. Stop. Roll down the window. And the guy walks up to the window. And I'm like, "I'm here for Warren." He's like, "We've got it. Good. Back the car up. Straight back. The gate will open as soon as you get to it. Back straight up. Do not back up." It was like that kind of stuff. So I've had, as a production assistant, I was able to see so many different aspects of the industry. And I would say my time, which I think was about 5 or 6 years as a production assistant, during college and after, was the most valuable kind of learning experience that I could have possibly had in order to train me about how this particular business works. Because I saw it from every direction. I saw it, meeting all kinds of interesting people and producers and directors and seeing how production works. And, so the answer to your question is, I do not have any family members. And my path was to start from the bottom and work up.
I'm a little curious here. I was born in Hollywood and raised in L.A. or the outskirts of L.A.
Me too.
Right out of college, I did 1 week as a production assistant, and I just wasn't cut out for it in so many ways because it wasn't calling to me.
Yeah.
But there was something deep in it, apparently, that was calling to you. I mean, it's kind of tough work, and What is it that really was drawing you in? I mean, you mentioned you love I Love Lucy episodes and things like that, but was there just something that was magnetic about the whole industry for you at that point? Or?
To me, I always felt like I got intoxicated by films that affected me. There was a number of television, of course, because I was driven by those stories, but movies, there were a few really key movie-going experiences where I was like, not only do I think this is an incredible art form, but it's really affected me emotionally, and I think it's wonderful. I loved the theater, and I still love the theater, but I didn't feel like I was cut out for the theater. I didn't think that I could be a theater director or a theater actor because it was a world that was, I think, too unfamiliar to me. But television and movies, I felt like were something that, because of these sort of seminal experiences of seeing certain films in certain places at certain times and things like that, and then getting to go to movie sets and see the process and to see this collaboration with all of these people that come together, and how fun it is. I mean, literally, the reason why I'm doing this career is because it's fun. For me, it's not about like the fact that like, oh, I'm going to get an Academy Award. I mean, sure, that'd be great. Or I'm going to make a lot of money. Oh yeah, sure, that would be great. It's because it's fun. Because I have a great time. You know, they're great people who work in the industry. Everybody's really doing it out of passion, almost always. Every single person on the set, including the production assistants, are there not because they're just collecting a paycheck or because they're just hoping to kind of use this to transition out of something. And if they are, they're not going to work in the industry very long. You really have to be passionate because those are the people that are going to move up. You know, it's not the competition aspect of it really isn't about like, I'm better than you. The competition aspect of it is about, are you showing a sort of level of enthusiasm that will allow me to want to work with you again? Because it's a circus show, right? It's transient. I mean, you work on a show for at the most.
That's what the insiders are looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Enthusiasm. People who are interested. Do you want to work in the industry? Yes, there's going to be some long hours, and you might have to, scrape up a little dog poo every once in a while. But effectively, like, if you're into it, we want you. If you're into it. And so I was very into it. I loved the movie set. I loved my first movies that I worked on, going on a movie set and seeing, you see all these trucks, there's 25 semis filled with stuff and 50 guys dragging stuff around, and you go on the set and it's like more things and it's all dark. You go into the soundstage and it's all dark and the lights are on and you smell that. There's a very specific smell, very, very specific smells in the industry. The light, when I started working in the industry, they were using carbon lamps, which they don't use anymore, but we were using carbon arcs, and the carbons have a very specific smell to them. The wood from the construction has a very specific smell. And when I became an editor, which is for a later question, but I chose editing for my career, and we were working in film, and the smell of the film, it has a very specific smell, and in order to keep track of the film, you go through a coating machine, and a coating machine is like a hot stamp kind of a machine, and the coating machine and the burning of the oil on the film, that has a very specific smell, So there's very, very tangible, visceral sort of things that make the experience for me really exciting, because it's like that's the people and the collaboration, and of course the stories that you're telling and the way that you're telling them and how the camera gets used and all the excitement of having the actors there, and you get to talk to the actors and that's what I loved about it. And so it was very easy for me to get intoxicated with that environment.
So I met you at a pizza place, not at some industry hotspot, and you were
That's not an industry hotspot?
Well,
I guess I'm going to the wrong place.
Maybe it is. And I actually, I didn't. You were so understated at the time. I didn't really realize that you've got a ton of credits. You're kind of a big deal. You've done a lot.
Well, thank you.
And
here's your $10.
Yeah. I take credit card too. But I was wondering, you've been in the industry for a while. Would the Fred of 20 years ago looked at the guy you are now and said, "Yeah, that he's got a good career. He's done something." Like, do you feel like you've arrived in your career?
Interesting.
Or I don't want to say now, but would the guy of 20 years ago said, "Yeah, that's what I want to be when I grow up"?
Okay, I have to answer that in 2 chapters. Okay. Chapter 1, the answer to your question is: would I look at would the person who when I started out as a production assistant looked and said, I could be that person? I would say yes, and the reason why I say that is because I think part of reaching a goal, I believe that part of reaching a goal, or at least seeing through ideas that you have for yourself, is about envisioning them. I think you have to have somewhat of a picture in your head of who you want to be. Mm-hmm. Some picture. It doesn't have to be a complete picture. As a matter of fact, it's probably better if it's not a complete picture. If it's a complete picture, then you probably will fail yourself. But at least some picture in your head of I want to be this guy. So I had heroes, filmmakers that I aspired to be, and I still aspire to be. David Lean, Alfred Hitchcock, Frank Capra, people like that were my heroes, and I looked at their careers and I looked at the choices that they made, because it's all documented. They have biographies and they have autobiographies, and you can read about what these guys did. So if I want to be David Lean, what am I going to do? Well, I chose to be an editor. David was an editor, and that was directly because of that guy. And I thought, okay, this is the best storyteller that I can think of. What did he do? Well, he started editing, right? So, did I picture myself as David Lean? Not necessarily, because I'm not British, and I haven't yet made Lawrence of Arabia, and I think he was making Brief Encounter at about my age. But having said that, yes, I had a picture in my head, and I would be able to look at myself today and say, good job. I wouldn't say, yay, woo, awesome. Okay, which is chapter 2 of the answer to your question, and that is, the idea of arriving is frightening to me because I don't want to arrive. That's scary. You know, I want to always feel as though there's some place to go, and I really feel like there's a lot of places for me to go now. Like, meaning I've been very successful in television. I've directed now 86 hours of television as a director. Before that, I probably edited 50 or 60 hours of television, and before that I worked on 20 movies, you know. But I got to tell you, I feel like I have a long way to go. And whether this is applicable to other people or just me, but I have to say I'm 49 this year, and I feel like I'm running out of time. Like, I want a lot more time, and I want a lot more experiences in order to sort of like put together the composite picture that I have in my head of who I'd like to be. So I hope those are actually in opposing answers to the exact same question, but hopefully I've explained it in a way that's understandable.
I have to circle back to my next question because you're leading me into a really good question. I want to mirror it back to make sure I got it. It sounds like you would have been satisfied that you made good choices and you've done good things in your career to this point.
Yes.
But you've got more to do.
Correct.
And I don't really know how you measure success exactly, but it sounds like, or even if you aren't measuring success, you've got other things you want to do that
yes.
are part of your long-term image of who you want to be when you grow up.
Correct.
Can you tell me a few of the things that you want to do? I mean, I can't, or is it safe in your industry to say the next thing I want to do is
sure
blank?
Why not? Maybe somebody will listen and go like, "Hey, I'm going to give Fred that Lawrence of Arabia job."
Audience.
So, well, you know, I think I always wanted to make movies. What kind of movies is a very fluid idea because I'm a big fan of epic films. But today's definition of an epic film is not my definition of an epic film, meaning like I'm not, you know, and movies are made differently now than they were. So I'm in kind of a process of redefining what it is that goal is, because Dr. Zhivago and Cleopatra are not being made. They're not making those movies right now. There's a number of reasons why they're not making those movies, and that is because there's huge gambles in them, and because of the way that the studios are structured. The money that's available for big films like that really has to be a lot more, as you know from watching movies, tailored towards an audience that's pre-existing, where they know that there's a guarantee that they're going to make money. Superhero movies at the moment is current. So the type of movie that I aspire to make isn't necessarily being made right now. Maybe they will be again. Sure. There's also independent films, which I think are fascinating, like low-budget films that are like, oh, you know, I want to travel and shoot. I travel now currently for work, but like I really, you know, I'd love to shoot a movie in Mongolia. I'd love to shoot a movie in Irkutsk. You know, it's like I have designs of like seeing the world and presenting the world from my point of view, you know. So I aspire to do that. I also aspire to provide the most well-rounded and interesting lifestyle for my family, for my wife and my 3 children, and that's important to me as well. So my choices are very tailored towards that as well, in terms of how much travel I do, or what kinds of jobs I work on, or how long I'm working on a job. I want and when I say well-rounded, I mean applicable as a parent, but also as in presenting what I'd like them to see the world to look like. Mm-hmm. And what the world is, you know, to me, I'd like them to see that. And so my goals have to do very specifically with those things.
I want to shuffle back to your family in a few minutes, mm-hmm. and how that's shaping your mm-hmm. thoughts. But I wanted to ask you a question. I noticed that you made a short film titled Lost. Mm-hmm. And, well, I guess I have 2 questions. One is, did that feel really different to you to work on that? Did you have more skin? Because if I read the credits, you wrote it, you directed it, you produced it, you did all of it.
Yes.
And did you have more skin in the game? Did that feel different compared to?
Well, it was very different because at the time I was an editor and I was aspiring to be a director, and I felt as though I was at a point in my career where I needed to make a big move, and it was a big move, and it was. I'm grateful, very grateful for the pain and suffering that I went through in making that film, and the situation was at the point in which I made it. I was working mostly in commercials, advertising, as an editor. And I was very frustrated because I felt as though I wasn't telling stories and I was working in a completely different industry with a completely different set of rules. And although I was making a lot of money, I was doing visual effects for movies also at the same time. And so I was dabbling in movies and things like that. But I was very frustrated at that point because it was like I felt like my skill set had plateaued. And I was at an age where I would feel that way. I was like 30-something. 30 or 31, I can't remember. But anyway, so I wrote this short film. I thought, okay, the only way anybody's ever going to recognize me as a director is if I make a film. So I wrote this short film, and it was big. It was expensive. And I wanted to make it with my own money and get it out there, get it to festivals and have people see me as a director and all that stuff. And so I got a bunch of my friends together, and we hired a crew, and I mortgaged the house, and my wife was 100% supportive. My wife was the script supervisor on it. We did it together, and everybody, my family, my parents, everybody was completely supportive. I paid for it myself with our money, and I went and I made it and completed it. And I had this idea, which, thankfully, since I've had this experience, I'm able to, when people ask me, hey, what do I do? I'm able to give this advice. And that is like, I had this expectation that somehow I was going to complete this short film and I was going to put it out into the universe and God would come back with a directing job, which was completely false. But I did believe it at the time. I really did. Like, even if I said, oh yeah, who knows? I think fundamentally on a real deep level, I thought, I'm going to get work off of this film, which did not happen. People saw it, they enjoyed it, they thought it was good. The next question came up, what do you want to do? What do you want? We like your film, like, great. And? So I needed to generate my own work from that. So I can tell you that the most valuable experience that I had from making that film was that I convinced myself that I was capable, because I don't think I really knew before that I was. So the film served me a better purpose than getting me a directing job, in the sense that in making it, and I say painful, it was painful and long process. In making it, proved to only provide me with the personal tools in order to have confidence to move forward. That's what it did. Did people look at it and say, oh, Fred can direct? Yes, they did. But I didn't get a job from it. So the question about what Lost is and how it connected to, I happened to it when I finished the film. I had started working on a series, Alias, with J.J. Abrams, and I was an editor when the film was finished, because it took me like a year and a half to make it. When it was done, I was working on Alias. So there is a coincidental thing that happened, that the TV series Lost was developed during that period of time. That's a longer story. I could tell you another time how that was developed and how it came to JJ and how they made it. But ultimately, there's been connections made between my film because of the similar name and the fact that I work with JJ and was working with him at the time, that there's a connection between the film and the series, and there isn't. Although it's very thematically similar.
I was trolling around on some chat boards trying to, learn more about your short film, and someone pointed that out.
Yeah.
There must be a connection. So,
well, because there's a number of elements in that film, in the short, that are completely coincidentally connected. There's something that you could interpret as the smoke monster. There are shots in the short that are identical to shots that are in the pilot of the series, which JJ directed. But I can tell you there's zero connection, other than the fact that it's coincidental.
I want to ask it's sort of a change in gear question. When you're working on these big shows and there's a big budget on the line and there's, a huge crew of people that are working under you and you're making all these decisions on the fly, it sounds like. You do some preparing, but you make decisions in time as well. I'm kind of curious, what feels like the hardest part of the job when it's all going down?
That's an interesting question. The hardest part, I think for me, I would say I would have told you 10 years ago that the hardest part is getting it all done in time and getting everything you want. But I would say my feeling about that is different. I think that the hardest part now is telling the story in an effective way, given the limitations of what you have. There's always limitations. There's never enough money. There's never enough time. Doesn't matter how big the show is. There's never enough money. There's never enough time. And nothing ever works out exactly as you planned. But that's also, by the way, part of the fun of it. But telling an effective story and telling it well is the hardest part of the job. And it's also very stressful. That's the most stressful part of the job, is you owe it to the people who are producing it and paying for it and have written it. But you owe it to yourself that you're going to make the best story in the most interesting way. And I hold myself accountable for that. In so doing, every single time I get a chance to direct something, my intention is for it to be the best thing I've ever done. Because otherwise it's not fun. Like I said, it's all about having fun. And for me, the fun part is doing something better than I've ever done before. So I look at it in terms of like, okay, this is a challenge. Let's say the script isn't exactly what I'd hoped it would be. Well, how do I fix that? How do I make it great? I'm not going to rewrite it. I can make adjustments to it, but I'm not going to rewrite it. So how do I make it the best thing possible? Well, that's challenging. That's hard to do. Or conversely, when you have an incredible script, powerful, has all the emotional beats, like rise to that level with that script. You need to do that amazing script justice, but also take it to an even further level. That is very difficult. So the storytelling responsibility, I think, would say is the hardest part of directing.
All right, we're about the halfway point, and there's a whole lot more good stuff coming. Here's a few seconds of music so you can recalibrate your mind. We're listening to the track Joshua Johnson by the band Ghost Note. The core of that band is one heck of a percussive duo. You really should check out the whole album. That album's called Fortified. It's out on RSVP Records.
People on these sets that you're working on, a lot of them are aspiring to be you one day, or someone like you. And
sure.
I'm curious, how do you manage all of these people to get the best out of them, doing what it is they're doing today, as opposed to managing people who are trying to move up the food chain while simultaneously working on your set? How do you get the best out of people?
I would say for the most part, everybody pretty much is in transition. I think that everybody, even career-long camera operators, feel as though there's a place to go and that there's something that they want to do that's more or better. I think that's just human nature. I think everybody feels that way. Some more directly than others, and each person is different. But as we were talking about earlier, I feel as though the film industry, and I can't speak to any other industry, the film industry in particular is populated in the working world with people who are there because they're passionate and because they're interested and they want to be part of it. There's something about that happened in their childhood. There's something when they got tired of their job as a lawyer and they ran across a movie set on Ventura Boulevard. There's something that happened to them that caused them to become excited and passionate about the film industry. And so when you're working with a camera assistant who's pulling focus on the camera, and you've got a really complicated and hard shot, let's say, where the focus shifts, the key to it is investment, is that they want to be invested in what you're doing. They want to be invested in what they're doing to a point in which they know that they're helping and they're making something great. They're doing their best work at that moment, and you want to help them do their best work because it's going to only help you. Like, I'm only as good as the people that I'm working with. I really am. I mean, I could be a great storyteller, but I can't do everything. I need those 100 people, literally 100 people, to pull weight and to get it done. And so it's truly a collaboration. Everybody says that, but it's not BS. It's truly a collaboration. Everybody works together to make the movie. And so you find in each person their own passion. What's interesting to them about their job? What's interesting about that first assistant cameraman who's pulling focus? Does he like the actors? Does he like his boss, the director of photography? Is he buddies with the camera operator? What's happening with this guy that I can help them find their best selves? And that's really fascinating and fun for me because it's people. I love people and I love communicating with people. So each person, as much attention as I can possibly give, and sometimes it's in a global way of like giving a speech or going around and patting people on the back or shaking their hand or asking them how their day is or talking to them about the shot or talking about what my plans are for a scene, whatever it is to get them personally invested in the project and on the same page with me about the story that I want to tell. I'll do that because it yields results. I'm not doing it for any other reason other than the fact that, one, yes, I like people, but I see the results. I see the result that it translates into better film. And the actors are the most acute example of that. The actors are there because, I mean, they're exposing themselves in a way that you and I cannot experience. And they do it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, the rawness, the emotional rawness that an actor has to experience on it, especially on a television series, every single day. They have to do that. They have to be prepared. They have to know their lines. How do you motivate an actor to tell your story with you? Well, it's about that investment. It's about like sharing your ideas, getting them to collaborate with you, helping them, being supportive of them, helping, they're the most vulnerable people, absolutely, by a long shot of anybody on the set, and they need the most support. But if they have a director or any other leader, a writer or a producer that's willing to invest with them, willing to get into what they're doing and help them and tell them that they're appreciated and they're paid attention to, they're going to completely shine. And so that's my job, is effectively to motivate people by helping them find their best and helping them find the reason why they're there.
It's kind of a deep answer.
No, I think it's too long.
We can do it. So you had mentioned, you didn't start at the top. You've got a ton of credits, but some of them were at the bottom. Uh-huh. And you were an editor, and that probably helped you figure out how to tell a story too. And you've done a lot of the jobs that you now supervise.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of curious, having done all of that stuff, are there certain people or certain crafts or trades or jobs of people that you work with now that you just sort of resonate with? You have the easiest time connecting to them? Or
yes.
Rephrase that. Who are they?
Who are they?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I did perform. I mean, truthfully, to be honest about it, I did as I was a production assistant. I was also a camera assistant, so I worked in the camera department. I worked in the grip department on a couple of shows. I was in the lighting department in a couple of shows. I worked in visual effects for a very long time. I became an apprentice film editor, an assistant film editor, and I worked on movies. I worked on Forrest Gump as an assistant film editor with my neighbor, who was my boss, Artie Schmidt, who lives in Santa Barbara. A hero, amazing filmmaker, who I learned a lot from, and then an editor, specifically an editor. And so on the set, I did a number of functions that I work with those people today, and I would say that I appreciate every role. Just to say it as a blanket statement, I appreciate every role on the set, and I appreciate their function. The connections I make are probably more to editing and to editors because I spent more time as an editor. However, it's very, in my own head, volatile because I was never judgmental towards editors when I became a director for the longest time. But I have to say now, over a period of time, I've become a lot more kind of specifically focused about how the editorial process should work because I come from the old school. So I'm more critical of editing and editors than I once was, but it's fairly obvious as to why I am, and it was because I used to do it. And I come from a different school in the sense that working on film with film equipment in the old school way of making film, cutting film and all of that was a very different process in terms of the workflow and everything like that. And now, in today's world, electronic editing has completely changed how editing works. So I have a different eye, let's just say, when I look at editing. And I make connections with editors, I think, more than... Also, directors of photography, and only because that's my primary technical collaborator on the set is the director of photography. So I make very close connections with the directors of photography, and my closest friends are cameramen.
Yeah, and I suppose it is a visual art form. So
Yes, yeah.
if you don't have the people who are helping you visualize it, close.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I would say my best.
you would need one on a podcast.
Yeah, right. I would say my best buddies are DPs.
Okay. I don't want to keep you too long, but we have about 20 more minutes. Can I ask you a few different questions?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Uh-huh.
Artistically speaking, how do you know when you're getting it right? Or do you even know in the moment?
Mm-hmm.
Do you just sort of... Is it something you figure out after it's all done?
It's really it's I hate to say it, but it's really a gut feeling that comes from experience, I think. I think initially, as a storyteller, when I first started telling stories, it was about familiarity. So, like, I'm doing a shot, I rip off people every day, but I'm ripping off Steven Spielberg, let's say, which I do constantly. Like Close Encounters and movies like, they're Bibles to shot making. And so, let's say I'm ripping off Spielberg. The camera's supposed to travel, from a push in on the mailboxes, and the mailboxes start to shake, right? So I'm doing that shot, and when I say rip off, I'm being silly about it. I'm not really ripping it off because you're not literally doing the same thing. You're just taking the idea, the kernel of the idea of like, okay, it's the mailbox shaking scene. So I'm doing that shot, and all of a sudden the mailbox start. The camera pushes in, the mailbox starts to shake too early. No, that's not the right. No, come on, guys, you got to shake the mailbox later, right? So you push in, the mailbox shake, right? So the familiarity of that tells you, okay, I've gotten it right, okay? Well, you do that enough times, you start to kind of like generate your own ideas, and you start to go like, okay, well, it's something like that, but I think it's more like this, or it's like that, da, da, da. And then over time, over experience, you start to gain your own sensibility of kind of like, oh, that's clicking, or that's working. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's something that I haven't tried before. Oh, okay. And so you have a gut feeling. And I think the gut feeling, the kernel of the idea, comes from some sort of familiarity with something that you've experienced or some idea that you have in your head that's been generated. But later is, like, for me, and I talked to JJ about this very subject too when he was directing, is the most exciting creative realization is when it's completely not what you expected, and what's coming out of your mouth is completely not what you thought you would say, and what the actors are doing is completely not what you thought it would be, and you've captured it. And there's that moment of like, okay, that's incredible. I can't believe that just happened. We're done. Let's move on. I'm not going to try to get that thing that I had in mind, because that just happened, and that's great. But it takes a lot of experience to get to the point in which, when magic happens, which happens all the time, that you know where it's happening, just like the weather. It's like the storm's coming from this direction. We're going to get in the car. We're driving that way. And you have to do that creatively as a creative person. You have to know where the weather is. And you got to go for the weather. Because your plan, believe me, my plan sucks. Most of the time, my plan sucks. Really. And what happens in the moment is way better, and you have to know how to capture that. And I think that's effectively it. When I say it, it's a gut feeling. I would hope that it would inspire somebody who's listening, could say, my gut's telling me that this is better, but everything about what I know about how I want to tell my story is telling me that I need to do it this way. Go with the gut, always. Even though, and that's how you find your voice. That's how you find your voice as a storyteller, or as a writer, or whatever. It's like there's something. It's not what I thought it was going to be, but it's this. I'm going to take that, and you're going to grab it, and you're going to let that little voice inside of you, like, speak. I mean, that was the biggest. I'm rattling on now. That was the biggest realization for me coming from editing to directing, was that, like, editing is very mechanical. It's very visceral. Like, you have the film and you're cutting it together, right? As a director, you're generating ideas, and it's coming out of your head, so you have to explain it to people. You have to say, okay, this is a scene about a guy getting scared because he's about to get hit by a car. So you can't just assume everybody knows how to tell that story because nobody knows what's in your head, right? So you got to go, okay, he's standing in the middle of the street and the camera's going to push in on his face and he's going to have this freaked out look on his face. And I mean, he used this wide angle lens so that his face gets all distorted right before the car hits. And nobody's going to know unless you explain it, right? The dolly grip's not going to know how fast to push the dolly. The cameraman's not going to know what lens to put on. You have to tell him, right? So or talk about it, right? So I had to learn that voice inside my head that was very, very mechanical when I was editing, it just happened automatically, had to be something that I had to learn to listen to clearly. Like, what is that little voice saying? So I listen to the little voice. It tells me to do something now, and I can do it. But it took me a long time to develop that skill.
So the answer is you hear voices.
I do. I do hear voices.
And trust your gut.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. It's kind of interesting, too, because it sounds like you have to let go of the plan and the technicalities because the magic is not.
Can I tell you how nerve-wracking it is when there's 100 people standing around and you're spending like a couple of $1 million and you're abandoning your plan?
Yeah.
It's nerve-wracking.
It must take a level of confidence.
Well, you do it out of defiance the first couple of times. And if you get away with it, then the next couple times you're doing it out of confidence. But I would say the first time it happened to me where I abandoned a massive plan, I was met with a lot of criticism and I was a little bit defiant about doing it. And then I think the next few times I was able to stand on sure-footed, confidence that it was going to work out.
So, I want to ask you about, you have a family and a wife and,
Very fortunate.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good life, but you have a different set of concerns outside of your career.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious, at this point in your career, what makes you feel vulnerable? And when are you out on a limb?
At this point, I would say I want to feel vulnerable more than I do from a career standpoint, meaning, making a movie or developing my own show or trying an experimental film or making a documentary would make me feel vulnerable. And not to say that I'm not vulnerable in a sense that when I'm working on a new show or when I'm working, like I just did a series, Westworld, I felt vulnerable making Westworld because it was big and it was HBO and I hadn't done that before and it was fantastic scripts, amazing actors. I was vulnerable there, which is a really good feeling, I think. I would say what I'm most vulnerable about, and it's in the context of your question, which is that's like, having children and a household and a marriage to maintain while being passionate about my job is something that requires a lot of day-to-day flexibility and day-to-day nuance in order to be a good father to all three of them, because they're all completely different, all girls, and my wife, who is a very powerful, smart lady, and to manage that is very complicated, very, very, very complicated. Much more complicated than my job, and makes me vulnerable for sure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was your answer to my question. I think we're going to run out of time here, so I want to sort of wrap up a few questions. One, I'm curious, there's this rise of YouTube and cable and Hulu original series and Netflix. It sort of reminds me of when Major League Baseball expanded by a few teams and all of a sudden there was room for more players.
Yeah.
But it was also, that happened to be the year that the most home runs got hit because worst pitchers were in the game.
Right.
And
that's a good analogy.
I'm kind of wondering, do you see any huge opportunities or, you're in the industry and you're there.
Mm-hmm. But I haven't arrived.
But you haven't arrived. You're there, but you haven't arrived. But you're doing what the industry does.
Yes, and very, very fortunate.
At this point, you can probably dictate a little bit about what the future of the industry might look like, or at least have a really good eye for where are we going.
Yeah.
If there's anyone who's coming into the industry now, what do you see as with all this expansion and what do you see as the interesting, unique opportunities?
I think that with your iPhone or your other camera-enabled device, you're a filmmaker. And I think that that's incredible. As a matter of fact, the images that can come out of those little devices are unbelievable. And you're walking around with that thing in your pocket every day. And if you want to tell a story, you can tell it like instantaneously with this thing. And if you wanted to use a more fancy device, they're available, and they're readily available. You know, in the old days, and I'm speaking about old days like I'm old, but I'm not, just getting the equipment, getting the camera, getting the light. You needed lights to tell the story. You can't just take a camera and just go shoot. You have to light it. You know, that doesn't exist anymore. You can just make it, right? So I feel like the opportunities to be a storyteller are now infinite because everybody can do it. And if you're just inspired, you don't have an excuse anymore that you can't just go make a movie. You just go make it. Get your friends, get your buddies, like go do it, whatever. And exposure, I think it can be, I don't know enough about it, but honestly, like between social media and Instagram and YouTube and all these things, you know, you just put it out there. And if you've made something that's interesting and unique, and you get people to talk about it or whatever, it gains, you know, the kindling kind of turns into a fire, and you've got something, and you can build a career out of it. You know, I don't know how much money you can make doing, you know, just making a whole bunch of films, you know, and putting them on, you know, out there and getting, you know, money back from that. But certainly it develops into something if you just express yourself. And I would just say that the difference is that, as you know, people wanting to tell a story 40 years ago with a camera, it was a lot harder. Now you can just do it. And I think that you should. If you want to tell a story, I think you should not use the excuse of, I need to have grip equipment, or I need to have Meryl Streep. Like, go to the theater school, watch a play, go up to the actress afterwards or the actor and say, hey, listen, you know, I'm doing this thing this weekend. Will you kind of be part of it or whatever? You like just do it. Like, it's not hard. I mean, it's scary, but it's not hard to do, to go make a little movie somewhere. And that's what I would recommend is, it's like, if you're passionate at all about storytelling, go make it. Just go do it. Write it and do it and shoot it and get over it. And once you've done that, a door will open. It may not be the door that you wanted or expected, but a door will open. I guarantee you. In your head, for another idea or another avenue, or with somebody wanting to work with you, or somebody that thought you were creative and wanted you to try something. But just really move forward, because the opportunity is there in your pocket.
That's interview gold, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So this is going to be my last question. Then I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes until we run out of time, and I turn into a pumpkin, and I don't know what you do next. I'm not in your industry. I have a better understanding of what you do now, but it's still not really deep. And when I come into these podcast shows, and I have the questions that I have about what somebody does, but I can learn a lot about you by trying to figure out what questions you have. And so you're actually doing a favor for me, because if I ever interview anybody else in the industry, I'll have better questions to ask, and I'm going to learn about you. But what if you were going to interview a director? What questions would you ask?
I would have, the questions that I would ask now are different than I would have asked when I was younger. So I think it's important for me to say that, only because over time, because I've studied film, in my adult life, I've watched a lot of interviews of filmmakers. I've watched a lot of interviews of directors specifically, and I've read a lot of books about directors. And so a lot of the fundamental questions that I have kind of been answered, unless it's a newer filmmaker that I wanted to know, like the guy that directed Whiplash, for example. I'd love to talk to that guy about how'd you come up with that idea? How do you get that energy?
Why are you so angry?
Yeah, exactly. Why are you so angry? Yeah, your band teacher must have been a real asshole. Anyway, I would have questions for younger filmmakers, but if when you talk about questioning filmmakers, I'm thinking Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Robert Zemeckis, who I got to work with. What questions would I ask them? Well, I've heard a lot of their answers, and not to say that it's boring. It's fantastic and exciting. If you're interested in learning about Francis Ford Coppola, go watch his interviews. There's tons of them. They're great. But what questions would I ask specifically of David Lean if I could meet with David Lean and talk to him? I probably would ask him to walk me through the process of directing those actors. talk to me about what you said specifically to Peter O'Toole in this scene. What did you say specifically to Alleganis in this scene? What did he bring to it? What was he prepared? Was he there? Like, you wanted to have the camera inside this tent with this, like, moving feeling. Did you have guys on the outside of the tent that were actually pulling it to make it do that? The wind sound, was that something that you felt when you were in the moment, or was that something that you decided in post-production that you wanted to add? How did you come up with the voices that are just outside? Like, I would want to, like, pick apart a film that I revere on a very specific level in terms of the directing itself, what he did specifically. Not necessarily the story, because I understand those things now about why that story was conceived, and, you know, the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and how they came up with the idea, and, you know, how it was developed, and how much time they spent on all that. I know all that. But I would want to talk to that director in particular about specifically where those ideas came from, because that would help me and inspire me when I get the opportunity to work with actors about what I would say. You know, because every director, I met with a great director yesterday, who's a friend of mine, Dan Sackheim, and we talked about directing. We talked about directing actors. And directors, when they talk to each other, often, because you don't get to talk to each other very much because you're not working at the same time, right? So I got a chance to talk to Dan about directing actors, and that's where you get tips from, like, what they said to an actor. You know, it's like, so what'd you say? And he's like, oh, you know, I had to trick him. I had to tell him that something. I told him a different story. You know, like my working with Juliana Margulies over 7 seasons was an amazing transformation for me as a director, because first episode I did with her on The Good Wife was in season 1, and she was amazing, and I didn't want to over direct her, and I didn't want to be non-existent, right? I didn't want to go in there and, like, give her a bunch of stupid notes, and conversely, I didn't want to be like, okay, action. So I started to talk to her, and we became friendly, and we're good friends now. But I was like, I'm going to experiment a little bit. In my head, I said that to myself. I was like, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to give her a note about something that I'll see if she does it. And I knew that it was kind of a fishy idea, my idea that I had. And so I came up to her and I very carefully said, you know, how about this? And she sort of looks at me, and she goes, okay. And I said, roll, and we did the take, and she did it. She did exactly what I asked her to do, and it was terrible. And so I walked up to her, and she wasn't rude. She's never rude. She's incredibly, like, incredibly collaborative. I walked up to her, and I was like, thank you. And she goes, sure, no problem, anytime. And then she did another take, and she did it the way she did it before, which was absolutely perfect. Amazing, incredible, nuanced, leveled, layered, everything, like, levels of incredible. And I realized, like, I better, like, know what I'm talking about when I'm directing this actor. And from then on, I didn't experiment anymore. I literally, like, I stood on solid ground, and I was like, this is what I want to say, this is how I want to play the scene, and this is my point of view. And she was incredibly collaborative, but I didn't mess with her. And she was an actress that I learned so much from, because, like, she was so prepared, she was operating on so many levels that I needed to understand and to catch up with her, let's just say, as a director, and hand her a glass of water on the way, you know, in that marathon, you know what I mean? Where there are other actors that really need to work through scenes, really need to talk to the director, really need to be part of, it's therapy, you know, it's like, you gotta work through these problems, and, you know, and they provide amazing performances after that, you know, and you feel so excited because you're part of it. But, like, Jules was like, you know, you're just catching up with her on the marathon, and you're trying to keep up and give her notes that are applicable to what she's doing. But anyway, that was an amazing lesson that I got. And this all, to get back to what your question is, you know, I would want to know very specific things that directors did in movies that I revere to get those performances, especially. And then technical things like, oh, how'd you get how were you able to get all that? I'm using Lawrence of Arabia, but I shouldn't. You know, I mean, Spielberg, I would ask, you know, like, how'd you get all that light? Like, what equipment did you use to get that light, you know, down on the car, you know, with Richard Dreyfuss, and, you know, or I just watched Jaws the other day again after having not seen it, and there's all those stories about the Bruce the Shark are famous, and everybody knows, like, how it didn't work and blah blah blah. But there's character things that happen in Jaws that are unbelievable, beautiful, almost like a documentary film. moments with Roy Scheider, and like I'd want to ask him, like, was that improvised? Did they come up with that, or was that in the script, or like how did you? That's a special moment, a precious moment with him and his son. Like how did that happen? Where'd you? And just I'd love to. And he, believe me, he's been asked that question about Jaws. He's been, so you can find this stuff. It's on DVDs, on the special editions of things. There's tons of interviews. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to reverse engineer magic that you've seen other places.
Well, so that it can kind of inform me,
so
like,
you can,
I can try and find it in the same way.
Yeah, that's... All right, I have to take some notes. So
Okay.
all of you industry people out there, directors, filmmakers, you might hear that question when you come on my show with my ones of tens of 30s of audience members. I've taken as much time as I said I was going to take. I don't want to take any more, but I guess as a parting shot, I wanted to say, Fred, thanks for coming on Make Moves.
Sure.
I think somewhere along the way, maybe your family gave you a break, or some friends gave you a break, or people in the industry gave you a break. Would you like to say thanks to anyone real quick?
Well, honestly, I there have been so many people who have been supportive of me in the industry specifically. I was shepherded by a number of wonderful people. Really, there's too many to name. And what I try and do as a response to that is try and help young people now as much as I can. So especially here at UC Santa Barbara, when I can be involved and when I can talk to kids specifically about what their plans are, talk them through their ideas, or just give them some form of inspiration. And when I'm working on sets, when people come and they want to talk to me, and I try to get them involved in my process, so that I want to give back as much as I possibly can, because I've been shepherded by a number of wonderful producers and directors and editors and people that I revere. But thanks really to my parents for being supportive of me, and for my wife for being supportive of me and my kids, for allowing me to go off and shoot in crazy places while they're here at home. I think is what I'd mostly want to say.
Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening in and hearing this episode with Fred Toye. It really was fun for me to hear him talk about television and film. He just has so much joy that beams through his voice when he gets on that topic. It's really refreshing. You can swing by the website makemoveswithjohn.com to get some more information about Fred. You can also find some links to discover more music by the band Ghost Note. And coming up on episode 7, we have Alex Sheshanoff. He's a disarming but brilliant author who's appeared in Slate, National Geographic Adventure, Marketplace on NPR, and he also has a hilarious book, a true story about his life called A Beginner's Guide to Paradise, 9 Steps to Giving Up Everything so you too can move to a Pacific island, wear a loincloth, read 100 books, build a bungalow, diaper a baby monkey, and maybe, just maybe, fall in love. Did I mention that's a true story? You're really going to enjoy that. Okay, until then, take care of yourselves. Go out there, make some moves.